They found her barefoot and bleeding in the woods, her skin carved with lines that whispered of intention. Not accident symbols, etched not by madness, but by method. The wind was quiet that day in October 1823, as if the forest itself held its breath, afraid to speak the name of what it had seen Margaret Hayes once. The bright daughter of a quiet frontier family was now a vessel emptied of will and filled with something else, something cold, something clinical. The hunters who discovered her said her voice didn't shake. It didn't weep. It just repeated over and over. The sessions must continue. The chair with leather straps. The doctor is watching. That was the beginning, or rather the end of what the town knew. The start of what it was never supposed to know. Milfield, Ohio wasn't the kind of place that birthed legend. It was the kind of place where people died, quietly forgotten, beneath moss-covered stones, but Margaret. She would not be forgotten, not after the doctors saw her, not after they saw what had been done to her, and what she had become. 3 physicians examined her, one after the other, each trained in the best cities of the young republic, each considered a man of science, a man of reason, a man of calm, and when each of them left the room, they left something behind. The first left his appetite, the second left his sleep, the third left Ohio forever. Her body was a map, but not of geography. It was a map of ambition, of something pursued, not by monsters, but by men, by doctors with steady hands and godless eyes. What had been done to her had not been improvisation. It had been design, and what remained in her eyes was not madness, but memory and protocol. This is not just a horror story. This is a warning, a record of how easily truth is buried beneath progress, how ethics is the first casualty of curiosity, and how sometimes the frontier is not just land. It is the edge of what a man will do when no one is watching, when he thinks history won't remember, when he thinks God isn't listening. In the summer of 1823, Margaret Hayes disappeared from her family's homestead in Milfield, Ohio, a cluster of cabins and muddy trails carved into the flesh of the frontier. Her father, Thomas, a quiet man, broken by both grief and labor, had woken to find her bed empty, her journal missing, and her voice replaced by silence. The neighbors searched the woods, the creeks, the ridgelines. They called her name into the trees, and the trees answered with nothing but the slow hum of insects and the whisper of wind through the leaves. At first they thought it was a bear or wolves, or perhaps an accident, a fall into a ravine, or a misstep at the edge of a fast stream. But there was no torn clothing, no blood, no signs of a struggle, only absence, only the shape she had once filled, now left hollow and cold. As the days stretched into weeks, the stories began. Some said she had run off with a man from the next town. Others said she had gone mad from grief or pressure or loneliness. But those who knew her best didn't believe it. Margaret was not fragile. She was brilliant, educated far beyond the other girls of Milfield, fluent in Latin, familiar with the new theories of electricity and anatomy. She had once written in a letter that the body was a cathedral of secrets and science, the last great mystery worth unlocking. Her father grew quiet. After her disappearance, he stopped tending the fields. He stopped eating. He would sit on the porch at night, staring into the trees as if expecting her to walk back out from them, untouched and unchanged. And when the hunters finally found her, 3 months later, she did walk out of the woods. But she was neither untouched nor unchanged. She had been rewritten. When Dr. Samuel Hartwell first laid eyes on her, he didn't see a patient. He saw a problem he couldn't solve, a presence that didn't belong in the world. He understood as she sat before him, calm, obedient, speaking, not as a victim, but as a recorder, reciting data with a cadence like machinery, like memory stripped of soul, and what disturbed him more than her scars, more than her vacant stare, more than her nakedness was the way she smiled. When he asked her what had happened, she said the observations are incomplete. The subject must remain still during the procedure, and then she waited for him to begin. The scars on her body were unlike anything Hartwell had seen in 2 decades of practicing medicine. Not the jagged wounds of an animal attack, not the chaotic disfigurement of a deranged mind, but something else, something cold and exact, each line etched with intent, as if her flesh had been used to draft blueprints for an anatomy unseen by any textbook. Her arms, her legs, her back were latticed with geometric cuts, symmetrical and measured, as if someone had mapped her nervous system like a cartographer, marking routes on forbidden land. Hartwell ran his fingers along the edges of the incisions, noting the precision. Each one a deliberate intrusion, a violation under the guise of procedure. He asked her where she had been, what had been done, and she replied without emotion. The subject was restrained. The copper probes were activated. Measurements were recorded. The data is incomplete. More sessions are required. She no longer responded to her name when he said Margaret. Her head did not turn, her eyes did not flicker. But when he said Subject M, she responded immediately, straightening her spine, adjusting her posture as if a forgotten command had been reactivated. And this terrified him, more than the words, more than the wounds, because it meant someone had rewritten her identity at the level of instinct, had burned a new language into her, with pain and repetition. Hartwell began to fear that what he was looking at was not just a victim, but a prototype. He tried laudanum. He tried warmth and familiarity. He tried hypnosis, but nothing brought her back. She remained suspended in that mechanical trance, speaking only when triggered by words like session, or compliance, or temperature. The copper instruments, she would say, must be heated to the appropriate degree. The procedure cannot be interrupted. Unauthorized variables must be contained. She had been trained, not healed, not helped, not treated, but trained. And the voice she used when speaking about the doctor, whoever he was, had no fear in it, no hate, only reverence, as if he were both God and jailer, as if she had willingly stepped into her own cage because he convinced her it would lead to something greater than pain, something divine. Hartwell was no longer asking what happened to Margaret. He was now asking what had been awakened within her, and who had done it with such chilling control. The descent began with her journal, brittle pages soaked in mildew, but still legible in places, a window into her unraveling mind. The early entries were pastoral, simple reflections on farm life observations about the weather, the rhythms of planting and harvest. But then sometime in late June, the voice on the page shifted, and what had once been Margaret's clean, sharp handwriting became erratic, fragmented, crossed-out thoughts, and obsessive repetition of unfamiliar terms. She wrote of Galvani and his twitching frogs of electrical forces that could animate dead flesh, of the sacred fire that danced through nerves and bones, her language borrowed from medical texts, but transformed into something almost devotional. The doctor, she wrote, does not believe in superstition. He believes in light, in stimulus, in truth. He had offered her knowledge, the one thing she craved more than safety, more than sleep, and she had followed willingly, convinced that what awaited her was discovery, not disfigurement, she wrote. I am honored to be chosen. The procedures are necessary. Pain is part of the process. My father would not understand, but the doctor does. He says, I am ready. Hartwell's fingers trembled as he turned each page, reading how Margaret spoke of her body as a vessel, as material to be shaped in pursuit of knowledge. She mentioned a chair with leather straps. She wrote about restraint, not with fear, but with trust. And that was what sickened him most. The realization that whoever had done this had not needed to break her spirit. He had only needed to seduce her mind. The journal was not a cry for help. It was a record of transformation. And what disturbed Hartwell most was the phrase that appeared again and again, written in the margins in different ink, like a ritual invocation. The body is the instrument, the doctor is the hand. This was no random act of cruelty. This was doctrine, a belief system with its own language, its own logic, and it had turned Margaret Hayes into both subject and scribe. Hartwell now understood why the other physicians had refused to treat her, why one had burned his notes and fled the state, because once you understood what had been done to her, once you truly grasped the design behind the wounds, you were no longer safe from the question that followed. What if this was just the beginning? He found the first clue sewn into silence, a slip of paper stitched into the lining of her dress, as if whoever placed it there knew the body might be found. But the truth would need to be hidden just long enough. The paper was smooth, higher quality than anything common on the frontier, the ink deep black, unmuddied by age and moisture. This wasn't a note from a panicked victim, it was a fragment of protocol. Subject must be secured using the leather restraints to prevent movement during the application of electrical current. Copper probes should be inserted at depths of no more than 1/4 inch to avoid permanent damage. Duration of session not to exceed 30 minutes. Adequate recovery required between intervals. It wasn't just the clinical detachment that chilled Hartwell. It was the unmistakable reality that these words came from someone trained, someone precise, someone working from a plan, and worse yet, someone with resources. This wasn't backwoods cruelty. This wasn't madness. This was methodical. This was institutional. The terminology matched Margaret's ramblings exactly. Sessions, stimulus, compliance protocols, copper instruments. It all aligned with what she'd said and what had been carved into her skin, as if her entire body had become a living ledger of someone's hypothesis. Hartwell began to make inquiries, quietly. Of course, the wrong word to the wrong man could mean his own ruin, and so he whispered along, back channels, visited old colleagues under false pretenses, asked about supplies, tools, journals, new arrivals in the county. And one name came up. Westfield, an abandoned property north of Milfield, untouched for 2 years, until recently when neighbors claimed to have seen light there late at night, always in the same window, always at the same time. Every night, then silence, a pattern not of squatting, but of experimentation of a laboratory, working under the cover of trees and fog. Westfield wasn't just forgotten. It was chosen because it was perfect, hidden, and so he went. Hartwell packed his bag, loaded his pistol, and followed the trail into the wilderness, not as a doctor, but as something else entirely. A man who had seen beneath the mask and could never pretend again. Because deep down, he already knew. He wasn't going to find a crime scene. He was going to find a temple. The forest path to the Westfield property wound like a serpent through rot and silence, each step cracking through layers of fallen leaves and unseen decay. And though the sun was high above the trees, it could not pierce the canopy overhead. The light dimmed, the air thickened, and everything living seemed to hush itself in anticipation. The house revealed itself slowly, a hulking shadow nestled into the land, like a predator crouched in wait. The log walls blackened with age, the windows covered in soot or dust, or something worse, the door ajar, like a mouth left open after the final breath. Hartwell approached, not as a man searching for answers, but as one trespassing into a sanctum built by monsters. The hinges didn't creak. They whispered. And when the door swung wide, the silence inside the house rushed out, like breath held too long. The front room was empty but too clean, swept deliberately, as if someone had erased, not just footprints but memories. And when he moved toward the back of the house, the stench hit him. Not rot, not filth, something metallic electric, a scent made of fear and fire, and something faintly medicinal. The back room was a shrine to agony, a crude operating theater, carved out of domestic space. A heavy wooden table sat in the center, grooved deep by blade and time leather straps fixed at the corners, stained dark with history, and surrounding it, an arsenal of precision cruelty, copper instruments, surgical blades, steel hooks, and a network of wires trailing to a voltaic pile. Glass jars and metal discs humming silently with remembered power. Drawings lined the walls. Not art, not anatomy, but maps. Maps of pain. Each sketch was a woman marked identically to Margaret Hayes. Incisions mapped geometrically measurements. Annotated like one would document rainfall or livestock weight. Then came the journal, not Margaret's. This one was leather-bound and reeking of authority, and as Hartwell opened it, the blood in his body seemed to freeze. The handwriting was confident, detached, and terrifyingly articulate. Day 1. Subject M shows high cognitive ability. Baseline incisions. Successful subject retained consciousness throughout observation. Day 15. Electrical stimulus introduced. Copper probes produce optimal response at 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Day 32. Subject M now assists with positioning protocol expansion authorized. And then he knew. This wasn't madness. This was order. The journal pages crackled under his fingertips, but the words burned into Hartwell's memory as if etched by fire. This was not a madman's scrawl, nor the cryptic ravings of a broken mind. This was methodical, precise, the clinical language of a man who believed himself above consequence, above morality, above God. Each entry was dated, signed, and executed with the kind of careful obsession only seen in those who no longer question the cost of their purpose. The handwriting matched that of another set of documents Hartwell had once studied in a professional journal, written by a physician widely regarded as a pioneer in neurology, a man whose name was spoken with reverence from Cincinnati to Boston, Dr. Elias Cunningham. The revelation came not as a shock, but as a confirmation. A horror that had been lurking at the edges of suspicion and now stepped fully into the light. Cunningham had been Hartwell's mentor, once admired, respected, even envied his resources, his connections, his intellect, all unmatched. In the territory he had published papers on nerve trauma, on cortical stimulation, on the ethics of pain. His theories were controversial, but his results undeniable. And now, those same theories had been carved into the flesh of Margaret Hayes. The anatomical drawings matched the scar patterns. The journal entries aligned perfectly with the 3 months Margaret had been missing, and scattered among the notes were names, others' names, each labeled as subject, followed by a single letter and a number. Subject A, Subject F, Subject L. Hartwell's hands trembled as he turned page after page, each one documenting a descent into calculated brutality, masked as scientific progress, pain catalogued like rainfall reactions measured with cold detachment, and at the bottom of one page a sketch unmistakably drawn from life, captured Margaret Hayes in profile, strapped to the table, eyes vacant, mouth open mid-sentence. There was no speculation anymore. This was a system, a dark method passed off as medicine, a violation dressed in white coats and academic authority. He gathered the journal, the diagrams, the restraints, the copper instruments, all evidence, all proof of the grotesque truth. Then, with grim resolve, Hartwell sealed the journal in oilcloth and buried it beneath the house, hidden where even the wolves would not smell it, and only one man would know where to dig, because he knew what came next. He would have to confront Cunningham. He would have to look into the eyes of a man he once trusted and ask him how many more had lain on that table. Comment below the phrase, "The mirror must crack," twice, if you're beginning to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. The road to Athens twisted through miles of forest, wet with the silence of early November, and as Hartwell rode, he carried no illusions of what he would find there. This was not a confrontation of equals. This was not medicine. This was a reckoning. Athens was a town of red brick facades and polished signs, where men like Cunningham wore civility. Like a second skin, his practice sat on Main Street, a two-story Georgian home with white shutters and manicured hedges. Nothing about it spoke of horror or hidden laboratories, but Hartwell had learned by now that the darkest chambers never announce themselves with screams. They whisper in the voice of trust, in the hands that heal. The maid answered the door and ushered him into the study, a room he had visited many times before. Walls lined with anatomical texts, jars of preserved organs, a globe in the corner, as if to remind the room of reason. But the moment Cunningham entered, everything shifted. There was no surprise, no pretended ignorance, no attempt to deceive. He saw the journal on the table and smiled a thin, careful smile. "Ah, you found the lab." It wasn't confession, it was pride. Hartwell said nothing at first, just opened the pages to the diagrams and pointed to Margaret's name. The doctor gave a nod, as if admiring his own handwriting, a difficult subject at first, but she adapted beautifully. The depth of her intelligence was unexpected. Then came the words that would haunt Hartwell forever. She volunteered, you know, of her own free will. She believed in the work. It was spoken without remorse, just a plain statement of twisted fact. Hartwell's voice finally broke through. "You drugged her. You manipulated her with prestige and praise. You tore her apart in the name of progress." Cunningham did not deny it. He merely corrected the language. "We liberated her from the shackles of ignorance, from the limits of primitive belief." And then he said something worse. "You think I'm the only one, don't you? This kind of research is happening in Philadelphia, in Boston, even in London. They just wear better masks." Hartwell realized in that moment the true scope of the nightmare. It wasn't about one man. It was about a system, an elite circle of minds, unbound by morality, guarded by titles and institutions, hidden in plain sight. He left the house with the journal still clutched in his hands and a storm building inside him. There was no law in Ohio strong enough to bring Cunningham to justice. Not in 1823, not when the man doing the cutting had a diploma from Harvard and friends in every medical board from here to the coast. So Hartwell made a different choice. He would tell the story, even if it cost him everything. He rode back through the woods, not as a doctor, but as a witness carrying the weight of a truth so vile it clawed at the edges of his sanity. The leaves whispered overhead, like the voices of the dead, and with every mile his resolve hardened. This was no longer a matter of science. This was war, a spiritual war, disguised in lab coats and academic degrees. Margaret lay in a fragile state, in the care of Mary Brennan, her mind flickering between lucid awareness and mechanical recitations of procedure. But when Hartwell sat beside her and opened the journal, something strange happened. She stopped, rocking her eyes, focused, and she spoke. Did the doctor send you?" Hartwell froze. She was not speaking to him as a man. She was speaking to the pattern, the presence, the ritual. He had read so much about her dissociation. Now he was hearing it firsthand. "I was compliant. She said I understood the protocols. I volunteered." Her voice cracked then, and for the first time in weeks, her eyes filled with tears. "I thought it was for something greater." And there it was, the real horror. Not the straps, not the scars, not the copper instruments, but the belief she had been made to carry, that her pain had purpose, that her degradation served a cause higher than herself. That is the deepest cut, Hartwell thought, when a system makes you betray yourself and smile through it. He asked her what she remembered, and through broken phrases she spoke of the sessions, how Cunningham would praise her intelligence, how he made her feel chosen, how the pain became part of the ceremony. And then she whispered the word, sanctuary. He asked again and again, and she repeated it, eyes wide, as if in trance. Sanctuary, the place behind the place, the room they never entered. Hartwell understood then that what he had found at Westfield was not the full extent of Cunningham's research. It was merely the outer sanctum, the visible mask beneath which something even darker had been concealed. He returned to the property that night alone. This time, guided not by evidence, but by instinct and dread, he passed through the empty main house into the trees behind it and found a small cellar door, nearly hidden by moss and overgrowth. It was locked with iron and marked with chalk symbols he did not recognize, a language of angles and geometry, not Latin, not Greek, something older. He forced it open and descended into the earth, and what he found there would make everything above seem like the work of amateurs. The air beneath the earth was cold and still, like the lungs of something long dead. The stone walls were slick with moisture and carved with the same symbols he had seen on Margaret's skin. A cipher etched into flesh and rock alike. The narrow staircase ended in a chamber that did not belong on American soil, let alone on a forgotten farm in Ohio. At the center of the room stood another table, but this one was not made of wood. It was stone, black, and veined with red, as if it had been cut from the heart of a mountain. It pulsed faintly beneath his fingers, not with heat, but with memory, as if it remembered every soul that had been laid upon it. Around the perimeter stood cabinets, locked boxes, and ancient tomes bound in a leather that Hartwell dared not identify. The place felt older than Cunningham, older than the Republic, older than the Church. This was no lab. This was a temple, a sacrificial altar masquerading as science. He opened the nearest cabinet, and inside were jars, each one containing fragments of human anatomy, but altered, impossibly altered fingers, with too many joints, eyes that shimmered under lamplight, lungs with veins that formed deliberate patterns. Not natural, not human, modified intentionally. Beneath the table was a pit, and inside it lay bones, hundreds of them stacked neatly, each set labeled with numbers and initials. The earliest, dating back to 1817, the year Cunningham first arrived in Ohio. So this is what it cost to pioneer medicine. Hartwell turned, and on the wall behind him, he saw the final piece, a mural painted in blood and ash. It showed a man standing over a crowd of bound figures, arms raised, not in mercy but in command. His face was obscured by a copper mask, and in his hand he held a rod that glowed with fire. The copper, the straps, the language of procedure. It was not just medicine, it was ritual. The merging of science and sorcery, the reanimation of an ancient occult that had hidden itself inside the respectable skin of the Enlightenment. And now Hartwell understood why Margaret said she volunteered not because she was weak, but because Cunningham had offered her meaning, and in a world of chaos and loneliness, Meaning is the most seductive weapon of all. Hartwell fled that place carrying with him the evidence of a system so blasphemous it disguised hell as healing and worshipped control as divinity. And still the question echoed in his mind. How many more sanctuaries lay buried across this land, masked by good intentions and academic credentials? Dr. Hartwell's return to the settlement was a shadow of a man weighed down by secrets that clawed at his soul. The journal, the sketches, the bones, the ritual chamber, all proof of a darkness far beyond frontier superstition or mere cruelty. He confided only in a handful of trusted neighbors, men hardened by frontier life, but none could fathom the depths of betrayal by a man sworn to heal, not harm. Rumors began to spread, whispers of a secret society of physicians who had forsaken their oath in pursuit of forbidden knowledge, who saw the body not as a person, but as a vessel for experimentation and domination. And Hartwell understood something terrible. This was not just about Margaret, not just about Cunningham, but about the very nature of power, disguised in the language of science. A system built to break and remake human beings into subjects of control. Halfway through this story, I want you to pause and write down the phrase, "I am the awakening. I am the awakening," twice, in the comments below. This is your anchor, your declaration that you will no longer be a passive observer, but an active seeker of truth. Repeat it again now. I am the awakening. I am the awakening. Let this be your shield and your sword as we descend deeper into the abyss of Margaret's case, because once you hear the next revelations, you will never see the world the same way again. They say knowledge is power. But here it is the price of freedom itself, the cost to unmask the architects of our unseen prisons. Are you ready to continue walking this path with me? The whispers of Hartwell's discovery reached ears meant to stay deaf. The county magistrate moved swiftly, sealing the official records under layers of dust and silence, consigning Margaret's story to a forgotten graveyard of truths no one dared exhume. But the darkness of Margaret's ordeal refused to be buried completely. For those scars were not just on her flesh, but etched in the very fabric of the community's collective memory as a warning unspoken. Hartwell found himself hunted by guilt and paranoia, convinced that Cunningham's network extended beyond medicine into the shadows of local power structures. Men who saw no limit to what they could sacrifice for progress. His nights were haunted by visions of Margaret strapped to that chair, leather biting into her wrists, copper probes burning nerves, precision cutting into flesh, but also into her very mind, until all that remained was a hollow vessel, repeating fragments of protocol. This wasn't mere experimentation. This was psychological warfare, a systematic erasure of identity, replacing human will with obedience and silence. Hartwell sought out those who might understand the magnitude of what had been done, but encountered walls of denial and disbelief even among his peers. The idea that such barbarism could hide behind medical advancement was too monstrous to face. And yet in the darkest hours, he vowed to keep Margaret's memory alive, to expose the twisted masquerade of science perverted into a tool of control and torture. This story is not just a relic of the past. It is a mirror reflecting the dangers lurking wherever knowledge is wielded without conscience or compassion. Prepare yourself for what comes next, for the truth behind Margaret's case goes deeper than any man dared imagine, and it threatens to unravel everything you thought you knew about power, fear, and survival. Dr. Hartwell's resolve to expose the truth drove him to retrace Margaret's final days, piecing together fragments from scattered letters, whispered rumors, and the last trembling words in her journals. But every clue seemed to lead him deeper into a labyrinth of shadows. He discovered that Margaret's disappearance was no accident, but a meticulously orchestrated abduction disguised as medical opportunity, a trap set by Cunningham, who preyed on the vulnerable intellect and curiosity of a young woman isolated from the world. The leather straps, the copper instruments, the cold clinical detachment, all pointed to a cold, calculated system designed to strip away humanity under the guise of scientific progress. Hartwell uncovered evidence of others who vanished into the same nightmarish experiment. Subjects marked by identical scars, subjected to unspeakable procedures, their fates hidden beneath layers of silence and fear. His inquiries unsettled powerful men, whose reputations depended on the concealment of these atrocities. Men who wielded influence over local law enforcement, clergy, and the press, ensuring that Margaret's case would never see the light of day. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became for Hartwell. The boundaries between friend and foe blurred as threats and warnings came in veiled forms, forcing him into hiding and isolating him from allies he once trusted. Yet his conviction only grew stronger, for the world needed to know that beneath the veneer of frontier medicine lurked a monstrous experiment, a system designed to bend mind and body to the will of those who dared to play God. Margaret was no longer just a victim, but a symbol, a martyr whose silence screamed from the shadows, demanding justice and recognition for the unseen horrors inflicted in the name of progress. As we descend further into this abyss, remember to write in the comments, "The chair awaits the subject." The chair awaits the subject to seal your place among those who dare confront the hidden darkness buried in history. Dr. Hartwell's next move was to confront Dr. Elias Cunningham face to face. Knowing the truth he carried could shatter the fragile peace of the entire region and expose a secret so dark it threatened to unravel the very fabric of their society. He traveled to Cunningham's brick house in Athens, a building that once symbolized hope and progress, but now loomed like a fortress, hiding unspeakable crimes behind polished doors and scholarly facades. Inside, Cunningham received him with chilling calm, as if he had expected the confrontation all along. The years of careful deception revealed in a cold, calculating gaze that spoke of a man who saw himself above morality. Cunningham boasted of transcending traditional ethics in pursuit of medical breakthroughs, claiming sacrifice was necessary to push humanity beyond its limits and rewrite the boundaries of science and human endurance. He showed Hartwell detailed records of his subjects, each one reduced to a clinical experiment, a case number stripped of identity and dignity, yet forever marked by the grotesque patterns etched into their flesh and psyche. The doctor spoke of progress achieved through pain control, of unlocking the secrets of the nervous system through relentless observation and manipulation. Yet his words revealed only arrogance and a chilling disregard for human life. Hartwell struggled to find words in the face of such cold intellect, a man who had turned healing into horror, a man who had manipulated trust and hope into instruments of torture and control. Cunningham warned Hartwell of the consequences of interference, hinting at powerful allies who would silence those who dared expose the truth and ensure the continuation of these dark experiments in the shadows. But Hartwell's spirit was unbroken, his mission transformed from mere discovery to resistance. Knowing the truth about Margaret's case could ignite a fire that might, one day, burn through the veil of lies and cruelty. The confrontation marked a turning point, a collision of conscience and ambition between two men locked in a battle over the soul of medicine and the price of forbidden knowledge. Dr. Hartwell left Cunningham's house burdened by the weight of truth, but fueled by a fierce determination to bring justice and expose the sinister depths of the medical experiments inflicted on Margaret and others. He returned to Milfield resolved to gather the settlement's courage and demand answers knowing that fear and silence had allowed this horror to fester unseen for too long. The community was fractured, some terrified to confront the reality that one of their most trusted healers was a perpetrator of unspeakable acts, while others dismissed Hartwell's warnings as paranoia or jealousy. But whispers grew louder and more urgent as Dr. Hartwell shared his evidence, his notes, and the testimony of the hunters who found Margaret wandering the woods like a ghost, haunted and broken. Neighbors who had once trusted Cunningham began to question the strange disappearances, the unexplained lights at the Westfield property, and the sudden illnesses that had plagued some families. Margaret's father, Thomas, shattered but resolute, emerged as a reluctant leader in this fight for truth, suing that no other family would suffer in silence as his had. The darkness surrounding Margaret's ordeal had begun to ripple outward, challenging the boundaries of faith, trust, and justice in a community caught between frontier isolation and the encroaching forces of scientific power. Hartwell knew the path ahead was dangerous and uncertain. But he understood now that the story of Margaret Hayes was not just a tragedy, but a call to awaken those willing to see beyond the comfortable lies that shielded cruelty and corruption. Days turned into weeks as Dr. Hartwell dug deeper into the tangled web. Cunningham had spun his investigation, revealing layers of deception that stretched beyond Milfield and even beyond Ohio's borders. He uncovered a shadow network of medical practitioners who skirted the law and ethical boundaries under the guise of progress. Their experiments cloaked in secrecy, protected by influence and fear. Correspondences hidden in Cunningham's files revealed coded exchanges with other physicians and wealthy patrons eager to fund research, regardless of the human cost. Their letters spoke coldly of subjects not as people, but as variables, data points, in a dark ledger of scientific ambition. The Westfield property was just one node in a wider system of clandestine laboratories where vulnerable individuals like Margaret were lured by false promises or abducted for experimentation. Hartwell's discoveries exposed how easily the veneer of respectability masked cruelty, how institutions meant to heal could become instruments of control and suffering. But spreading this forbidden knowledge came with consequences. The closer Hartwell came to the truth, the more he faced threats, veiled warnings from those determined to keep these secrets buried. His own colleagues distanced themselves, and whispers of madness or fanaticism followed him, as if the truth itself was too dangerous for ordinary minds to bear. Yet Hartwell's resolve hardened in the face of opposition, knowing that silence was complicity, and that revealing Margaret's story was the only way to honor her suffering and prevent further atrocities. As Dr. Hartwell prepared to expose the horrifying truth, he knew that naming Cunningham and revealing the extent of the experiments would ignite a storm powerful enough to shatter lives and reputations. The medical community was a fortress built on trust and secrecy, one that protected its own and punished dissent. But Hartwell also understood that beyond the fear and denial lay a greater purpose. Awakening the public to the existence of such cruelty was a necessary sacrifice to dismantle a system built on lies. Margaret's case became a symbol, a grim reminder of what happens when unchecked ambition and institutional power collide, when human dignity is sacrificed on the altar of progress. The county magistrate sealed the official records, ensuring that the full story remained hidden for nearly 2 centuries. But fragments survived in whispered rumors, in the hidden pages of private journals, and in the scars on Margaret's body that bore silent witness to unspeakable acts. Those scars were not only a map of pain, but a testament to resistance to survival, to the haunting memory of a young woman who had endured horrors few could imagine, yet remained alive. Hartwell's writings and his eventual public testimony shook the foundations of frontier medicine, sparking debates about ethics, consent, and the limits of scientific inquiry, debates that echoed far beyond Ohio. But the true horror lay in knowing that Margaret's suffering was not an isolated case, that somewhere out there, in forgotten corners of history, others bore similar marks. Hidden from the world, her story is a warning, a call to vigilance against the forces that would silence truth and manipulate human lives for power, knowledge, or profit. And now, as you listen to this story, you become part of that legacy, a keeper of forbidden knowledge, tasked with questioning what you are told and seeking the truths they try to bury. Now, as you stand at the edge of this dark revelation, take a moment to reflect on what you have uncovered. The story of Margaret Hayes is not just a forgotten tragedy, lost in the shadows of frontier Ohio. It is a mirror, reflecting the darkest impulses of human nature, the hunger for control, the abuse of power, and the ruthless pursuit of knowledge, at any cost. Her scars tell a story deeper than flesh, a story of silence, forced compliance, and shattered innocence. They speak of a world where science crossed the boundary into cruelty, where innocence was traded for experimentation, and where the very institutions meant to protect instead betrayed. The doctors who refused to treat her were not cowards, but men confronted with a truth too terrible to face. Yet they left behind echoes, whispers that have survived time to remind us that beneath civilization's surface lies a well of darkness waiting to be exposed. This story is your initiation into a deeper understanding, a challenge to your perception of history and truth. Comment below the phrase, "The scars reveal all." The scars reveal all to lock in your transformation and declare your readiness to walk further down this rabbit hole, where hidden agendas lie and forbidden knowledge waits. Remember that every secret uncovered shifts the balance of power, a dangerous gift that can change a man forever. And as you carry this knowledge forward, do so with the weight of responsibility and the courage to confront whatever darkness may come. You have seen what most are blind to. Choose your path. Will you close this book and return to comfortable ignorance, or will you embrace the shadows and seek the truth, no matter the cost? The choice is yours. But know this: once you know what Margaret endured, nothing will ever be the same.